Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Space for Earth panel. We're going to discuss today how can we advance this nascent LEO economy. And we probably first a good idea to talk about maybe some definitions on what we're going to be discussing today. I think everyone is probably well aware the current situation that we have in LEO with the LEO economy is one that's really driven and led by governmentally provided or procured goods and services. And a lot of the discussion that we're hearing at this conference, several of the panels, a lot of the folks that are here participating are working very hard to transition that governmentally led economy to really more of a true market economy, where we have goods and services, products that are exchanged based on true market-driven supply and demand factors. Doesn't preclude government from being a customer. It's not an either or, it's an and it's inclusive. There's several agents, several different types of organizations, entities, and even individuals that function within, provide to, and participate in a market economy. So the goal of today's panel, we're not going to probably solve that problem today, but I think we'll get a long way. We've got a pretty good panel here today. So the goal of today's panel is really to provide a forum for a very open and honest dialogue. I think it's fair to point out, and probably important to point out, what you're going to witness on today's panel is as close to reality TV as this conference is going to offer you. There will not be any slides or any prepared speeches or presentations. This is open and honest dialogue, maybe a little point and counterpoint. Then towards the end, we will have some time for question and answer from the audience and from online. So we look forward to that. So without further ado, we'll go ahead and get started. I'd like to introduce the panelists. Sitting on the far left, Mike Reed. Mike is the Commercial Space Utilization Manager at Johnson Space Center down in Houston, Texas. Also on the panel, we have Andrew Rush. In the center there, Andrew is the President and CEO of Made in Space. To Andrew's left, we have Christian Monder from Axiom. He is the Director in Space Manufacturing and Research. And then Chris Kimmel, who is the co-founder and chairman at Space Tango. And last but not least, Akos Hegi from Airbus Defense and Space. Be interesting to get some international perspective, European perspective today as well. So without further ado, let's start the conversation. Thought it'd be a good idea in the flow of the conversation to start with where we are today, sort of current status, and then we'll talk about how we transition into the future and transition this LEO economy, as I mentioned in the intro. So I thought we'd start with you, Mike, and learn a little bit about the transition report. I think probably most of the folks in this audience are familiar with the ISS transition report, and hear from your perspective what that means, and also maybe what is NASA's perspective on what NASA expects from a LEO economy, or how NASA will participate in a LEO economy.
Okay. The report we published back in the spring on ISS transition can be boiled down to about three main topics. The first one is that NASA is always going to have a need for LEO. We're going to be doing crew training, crew proficiency. We're not likely to do that in deep space the first time we send a crew to orbit. We'll be doing our fundamental research. It's decadal driven. The things that we do on ISS today, we don't see that going away. And we'll be doing our next gen systems development. Ecosystems and things like that are notoriously difficult to operate in microgravity. Fluids don't work the same way as they do in 1G, so we're going to be testing those out in LEO. I don't see that going away either. The second thing to take away would be the continuity of human presence in LEO. If we cede that, then bad things happen. We kill this nascent, demand-driven economy that has just started. We'll probably lose access to low Earth orbit for decades, not years, but much longer than that. And so we want to make sure that there is continuity once we're done with ISS, so we don't leave LEO until there's a next generation platform. And our goal is that's a commercially driven platform where the government becomes a customer of that platform and not the owner of the hardware. The third takeaway will be the strength of our international partnership and the continuity of that. It has served ISS well for over 2 decades, through financial crisis, through wars, through administration changes. But we as a program fly below the radar of politics. And we're governed by our treaty, and I think that has kept us strong. It's inevitable to me that the next program, the exploration program, is also going to be an international partnership. It's too expensive for any country to do it on its own. I think we have a vision that there'll be additional partners that are not currently formal partners on ISS, but that will be part of this next gen program, and that's probably the commercial sector. It's pretty easy for me to see that somebody's going to have an element that is part of that exploration program. So having said all of that, and having stated that we're always going to have a need for LEO, if we don't figure out a way, leveraging ISS and all its subsidized assets, if we don't figure out a way to help enable development of a strong, sustainable, and most importantly, scalable demand, we're going to be left holding the bag on the next-gen platform because we'll be the only user. And that's frankly not sustainable. We can't afford it. It doesn't solve any of the problems of trying to broaden the user base. And so our interest is in using ISS to figure out how to enable the development of an economy. The government can't create it. That's not what we do. We can certainly keep it from happening. But we want to do the opposite. We want to make smart decisions that allow that economy to develop so that it can scale into the next-gen platform. It's going to drive the need for a next-generation platform.
That's great. Thanks, Mike. So pulling on that thread a little bit, we've got a number of panelists who operate on the ISS today. They operate on board with commercial facilities in really what is a public-private partnership in space right now. So following on with that, I'll throw out a question to Christian, and maybe Chris, you can also respond. Hearing what Mike just said, what are the types of things from your perspective and your company's perspective that NASA can or should be doing, either with the ISS or other processes or activities that would help businesses like yours continue to develop in areas that could potentially scale out to some viable, sustainable demand in LEO?
Okay. Well, I think what I would want to emphasize from what Mike talked about is this whole idea of continuous presence in LEO. And I pull on it from the perspective of the idea that we need, Mike basically said, we need to do the smart decisions to do a sustainable and grow this economy. But we also need to make sure that we don't make mistakes that cause market interruptions. And there's a couple places near term where we really need to focus on this, and hopefully NASA can help do that. The first is related to, and this is in the national press, and the aerospace press a lot these days, it's continuity of crew access to space. And that starts with commercial crew. We really need to see a smooth transition from the commercial crew program into ISS without any interruptions. We're growing this market on ISS. We have all of these companies that are using the ISS to start their businesses. Having to reduce crew size on ISS is just, it's a roadblock to continuing growth of that market. But the second thing is NASA really needs to move out on creating an opportunity to let a commercial platform get started. And that involves, NASA really needs to start competing access to a port on the ISS as soon as possible. And the reason for that is twofold. It plays into what Mike said about continuity of human access to space. Space agencies internationally want that, obviously, because we need to sustain our push towards deep space exploration. But what I'm worried about is the market interruption. If you don't create an opportunity for companies like Andrew's or Chris's to continue their work on the ISS and have a clear path off the ISS to another platform, you create a massive market interruption where their business is interrupted, where they have a huge non-recurring cost because they lose all the hardware they have on board and then have to fly it again. Most of these businesses are not going to survive that kind of transition. So it's essential that you create a port opportunity for a private platform to come in and help transition those customers that are ready to move over to the commercial side. But the trick is, anybody who's in this business and builds spacecraft knows that to build a reliable and sustainable and safe human-rated spacecraft, especially when it comes to a space station, that takes time, and that really takes 3 or 4 years. And so we've got to get on with the business of that soon. And in order to do that, we really need to get access to a port, which drives interest in getting the hardware fabricated. And once we get it on board, there's still work to be done to actually build out the facility to be multi-user, to satisfy the needs of the manufacturing world, satisfy the needs of research. And then, so if you do the simple math, even if you look at all of the different variations that we talk about on ISS end of life, we're running out of time.
That's great. So recap, Christian, certainly continued crew presence uninterrupted was one of your major priorities, I think, is what I heard. But also actually physically having a place where you can take your new commercial platform, having some time to actually physically be docked to the ISS and continue that process of transition in a very practical, and I'm calling it a tangible and physical way, is an important item for you. How about you, Chris? What did you hear there?
No, I agree. I mean, I think it's funny because Space Tango is very, very much customer investor driven in many ways. And you know, a lot of times we hear from our investors. Twyman and I were just in Miami recently talking to an investor, and it's interesting how many times we're hearing a lot now where they want to know, well, what happens to your business when ISS goes away?
Right.
I mean, they're very, whatever it goes away, whether it's 2025 or 28 or whatever.
So some predictability.
They're very serious about that.
Confidence.
So I think, one, it's a good sign because I think investors are not they're not looking at this anymore as a kind of a hobby. Like, oh yeah, I'll put some money in because space is cool and maybe
Right.
space does some really fun things. I think they're truly looking at it and go, yes, I see this, we see this now as an emerging industry. We think this is important. So we're going to start asking you the same questions we ask everybody. And that is, what's your value proposition? How are you going to make money over the long term? How are you going to sustain yourself? And what happens, because you're so dependent in LEO right now on station, what happens, if that goes away? And they want you to have thought about that.
Sure.
And so we're hearing the same kind of challenges. And I think the other thing that we I think about, at least, maybe this is not as realistic as what we were just talking about, but I also think you talk about business interruptions, and I agree with that. It doesn't have to be a disaster. It could be something hits the station and they have to decommission it for a year.
Right.
That's a big disruption for startup companies.
Absolutely.
Because startup companies are traditionally cash flow driven for the first couple of years. So there's a lot of things. It's not things to fear, but I think things you have to think about. You have to because of those contingencies. Because as soon as you think they won't happen, they do happen.
Right. So it's interesting. We as managers of the National Lab, just in looking at our portfolio and working very hard on our awareness campaign, getting other companies, industry, commercial, or otherwise, we hear a lot of the same questions. Predictability, confidence. In your case, it's consumer confidence, it's investor confidence, making sure that you have the right financial markets who have that time to gain that return on investment. So, okay, great feedback. Andrew, I'd like to throw out to you, we've heard a few things from the panel on important components or facets that are needed. Looking at the current state and the way the activities work on the ISS and in NASA and through this governmentally dominated structure, are there any hindrances? Are there any things that we should be thinking about changing or addressing that prevent in the near term advancement along this paradigm of maturing the economy?
Yeah, I think overall we want to have as many shots on goal as possible, in the finite time we have. We want to, and that means we want to see lots of people, not just a few companies, trying and succeeding, trying and failing, getting things on orbit, seeing how it goes, and then and trying to demonstrate that proof of potential and demonstrate that there's sustainable and scalable demand. That's really the core of it. And one thing that does limit us is in the LEO economy, for folks like me and Space Tango and others that are saying, hey, we're going to be the demand we're going to be the demand side of for a LEO economy for these new platforms, but we're still have very high tech risk and have very high business risk, which means that the capital markets are not super interested in giving us lots of capital to scale it quickly. Now that's changed even over the lifetime of Made in Space. Like the last 8 years, it's gone from people weren't even investing in CubeSats to now every VC has a little pet remote sensing project, and there's more capital available for folks like us. But we really need more of that, and the way that I think that we can accomplish that, we can overcome that roadblock, is to be stimulating demand, and really putting some fire behind lots of different shots on goal, in the pharma research world, in the materials processing world, material manufacturing world, even from the sort of sovereign or kind of buy by the drink astronaut services, right. To really create these credit-worthy tenants that then can go, reside in future commercial platforms.
Right. Very good. Akos, I think I'd like to hear from you. Certainly you're in a unique position that you can represent sort of a European perspective. Right. And it's pretty clear, at least it's my view, that in order for us to really accelerate this market economy in LEO, it's going to take a global effort. We're going to have international participation. That's how markets function now. It's global participation in these market economies. So from your perspective at Airbus, to date, how is Airbus viewing the use of the ISS in driving this commercial development? And what do you see as far as maybe near-term opportunities that Airbus finds interesting or compelling or good potential in developing sustainable demand?
Right. So first of all, I just would like to highlight that the aspects that you guys have pointed out are exactly the same in Europe as well. Maybe just one word to the hindrances and perhaps barriers of entry. I think we also, from the supply side, we do have opportunities to lower those barriers of entry. We need to work on the cost, we need to work on the speed, and we need to work on making the utilization predictable and guaranteed to come up to station at a guaranteed point in time. For that, we have a lot of opportunities. We can, for example, we should look at. I mean, the station has been designed or has been operating for more than 17 years. So. We should look at the processes and look at it from the end user perspective and think about what does that guy need, and declutter all of our processes and use new methods that have not been there at the inception of the station, digitalization, automation, and think about that. Now, back to your question of what is Airbus doing and how are we looking at this developing. So first of all, we do believe in the commercial market as well. So we are also investing. We are one of the examples is, for example, Bartolomeo, where we are enlarging the station. And it's Bartolomeo. First of all, it's a balcony to give access to the station, to the external part of the station. But it's also a test bed in the sense of a market test bed, because we are exploring with it where the market is. And actually, what we are seeing is that the market is extremely broad. So we see interest from companies who want to do in-orbit validation or Earth observation, all kinds of things. What we do know, though, that we don't know where the killer application will be.
Right.
So the challenge will be to continue these type of developments in a way that they are flexible enough to serve all kinds of customers. And the second challenge, which you guys are also tackling, the second challenge is to know, where to do business development, where to do market development, and this is a huge effort. Where, by the way, Cases is doing a great job to assist.
Thank you. We're trying hard. So are a lot of people, though. That's I think a great segue into maybe the next section of what we'd like to discuss today, which is. How can we go about determining those focus areas, those areas within the marketplace that we feel like we can actually build up something that we can take off of the ISS that is sustainable and will continue to drive demand. And it can be driving demand, hopefully primarily commercial, industrial type demand, but as I said in the intro, it also could be governments, academia, and governments in totality, not just NASA, but government agencies in totality. What are things that we can do to sort of poke and prod and explore those areas, and where can we use the ISS possibly to do that? And I'll throw that to the entire panel, and we'll toss it around.
I think the ISS is an integral, irreplaceable part of that process. And it is a lot of, whether we like it or not, it is a lot of trial and error. I mean, that's what science is.
Oh, for sure.
One of the early days of our company, and particularly in the area of exomedicine, one of the people we got engaged was Dr. Barry Bloomberg, who was a Nobel Prize winner, who won the Nobel Prize for discovering the hepatitis B virus vaccine. I remember having lunch with him one day, and he said, how did you discover this? And he said, I wasn't even looking for it. I was looking for something else. And so you've got to have that platform that enables you to do that. And I think that's very, very important. And I think it also takes it does take a lot of imagination. I think it's not just it's doing the research, but also imagining a very different kind of world and imagining what the outcome of this could be, and and going for it, and not thinking in a very non-linear. We try to do that a lot. We try to just imagine things. The other thing I think is important, and we talk a lot about, is that when you design for space, when you develop for space, you're forced to innovate. Right. Because you have to design for very, very harsh, difficult, complex situations and conditions. It's different. And when you do that, it's always important to keep, no matter what you're doing, there's always potential for spin-off applications like Dr. Bloomberg. We weren't looking for that, but finding something out that could have near-term applications, product applications on Earth.
Right. So you mentioned exomed, that's in the life sciences,
yes.
I would say. How about other areas of interest, domains of interest, besides Chris's example there?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are a wide variety of examples and a lot of sort of strong and weak indicators that'll show us that look this is an economy that's growing, and we should be realistic about the timeline. It's many of us up here are entrepreneurs, and we can be very, very optimistic. And we can say, yeah, I'm going to be producing hundreds of millions of dollars of ZBLAN by 2024, and ready to jump off and go to somebody else. But I can also say, well, there's like 6 other models that I have that say
it's not just ZBLAN, right?
Right. Yeah. So the little joke that I like to tell about ZBLAN is that ZBLAN's it's like Luke Skywalker. It's not like Anakin. There is another. And there's metal processing, there's large crystal manufacturing on orbit, there's bioprinting, there's lots of different classes of things that we can do from a manufacturing and from a processing perspective that the microgravity environment, that the space environment enables. And many of those things, or a select few of those things, we know, or we feel now, have a market and have a price that will support launch operation return. But that's just based on a limited amount of research that's been done on microgravity, that's been done on microgravity science over the last 30 or 40 years. And we know that we don't know, that there's more out there. And we fundamentally believe, in that sort of nonlinear thinking way, that that this LEO economy is going to be as transformational as the e-commerce revolution. That this is going to be a huge boom and permanently alter the way, like the humanity's economy for both our nation and the planet as a whole. So we need to, so those kind of indicators are drugs being developed, manufacturing being done and scaling, sovereign astronauts and spaceflight participants flying. Like these are all the pieces of this future economy that you can see now. And as long as they continue to trend up, I think it's worthwhile for us to continue supporting it, giving it full-throated support and scaling it up.
Right. Christian, any thoughts from your perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I would echo what both Chris and Andrew have said. In the vein of what Chris has said, what I think is important is we need to figure out how we amplify the message across the board on people asking a simple question: how about space? And until that's a normal question in every boardroom, we're not reaching the right level of depth and interest, because once it reaches there, it pushes down to all levels of the company, and then all of that creativity from all of those people play into finding these nonlinear approaches to a new solution and using microgravity in another way. And then the way Andrew talks about all of the different market spheres, to get this economy started, it's going to be a multi-user opportunity. It's not going to be one sector of the economy that makes this real. We talked about crew and crew members and paid astronauts and those kinds of things, and we've talked about manufacturing and research. We also need to talk about advertising and marketing. One of the things we need to figure out how to do, even with perhaps ISS, is an adjustment, a transition of policy and code of conducts to allow companies that are busy trying to build a market to create useful advertising and marketing products with perhaps imagery from ISS that lets them build those markets. And you build those markets with advertising. So that's another place where we could see growth in the way we do business today, and ISS could become a more effective place to foster this market.
Just real quick on that, Space Tango, as many of us have, do really important, amazing things that we're really, we've done work in cancer, medical devices, diabetes, all sorts of things. And then we also have done work with Budweiser, with CASIS's help, to help them be the first company to brew beer on Mars.
Sure.
And we were on CBS this morning. Which one of those things you think, well, we were on CBS this morning?
It wasn't for those other things you mentioned.
It was this Bud's for you. So I think you're right. It's just, it caught people's attention, and to Budweiser's credit, they've shaped this in a way that they say this is representative of their DNA as a company. They said, where human civilization has gone, so have the spirits, and so the spirits have followed. But you're right. I mean, it was just, whether we like it or not, it got a lot of attention, and got a lot of people talking about microgravity, because it was like, why would somebody want to do this? And it was something they were interested in.
Mike, what do you think about that? How uncomfortable does that make you? Because it's coming.
To riff on what Christian was saying, obviously there's going to be a lot of things that are going to be necessary to sustain the next generation platform. There's a lot of them we can probably do on ISS, but they're going to be crucial to revenue streams on a next gen platform. I'll give you a paradox that we're dealing with right now. I said the government can help enable the economy, and we can certainly kill it and make sure it never happens. So case in point, we have a crew code of conduct right now. A single crew code of conduct is codified in law, as I found out. Makes it harder to change, as it turns out. And so if we have private crew coming to ISS, which is almost inevitable, we've had spaceflight participants on the Russian side. We're going to have similar on the US side or with our other partners. They're sponsored by a NASA or an ESA or a Russia to go to the partnership and say, here's who we're going to fly, and the partnership has to buy off on it. That's part of our rules. But because they're sponsored by one of the partner agencies, they fall under that existing codified crew code of conduct, which, oh, by the way, precludes participation in commercial activities that might imply an endorsement, which is precisely why the person is up there in the first place. So there's some real paradoxes that where the right hand and the left hand aren't exactly going in the same direction on our side. We're working on that. Right. Some of it we're going to need help from our congressional friends. Some of it we might find a way to interpret things differently, which is always the first approach that you want to take. But there are some oddities like that where we're kind of working at cross purposes within our own agency.
Right. Right.
Maybe to play off a little bit of something that Christian said earlier, that's this concept of having more boardrooms, be thinking about what we're doing. I think that, the impediments to that, or the opportunities there, are the space station. We need station to have the equipment that these guys are used to having on the ground. From a farmer perspective, this means that there needs to be a lab that isn't some bespoke lab for your special kind of assay, but it's a more general lab that looks like a contract research organization. And we also need to be operating at the speed of these industries. That from a manufacturing perspective, from a manufacturing optical fiber on orbit perspective, that means I need to be able to deliver. Once I'm scaled up, I need to be able to deliver thousands of kilometers of material within about 6 months or a year once I get an order. from a pharma perspective, that probably means that your research can't take like 2 or 3 years from like, hey, I like this idea to doing it on orbit.
Right.
And once that exists, as that sort of tide rises, I think we end up in more boardrooms and more people talking about us and thinking about us and thinking about using this economy, and then we have this nice snowball effect.
Yeah, and I would add that to accelerate that and to provide state of the art, that's where commercial shines.
Absolutely.
The speed and providing what the market wants. And so you can see it in terms of the evolution and the growth of all of these companies providing research services on ISS today. Their business is growing. And some of the facilities that have been built by the government, which were useful in the front end of the ISS program, I wouldn't say they're becoming obsolete, but they're being used less by commercial and more by traditional researchers. And so I think if you let markets drive what needs to be there, you're going to see both speed and accuracy in what's going to make money.
Right.
So,
yeah, I love that you touched on that awareness campaign, I think as we're calling it. I'd wonder from your perspective, and you mentioned it earlier, we're separated by a big ocean, but I think a lot of our challenges are the same. What's your viewpoint in Europe? Is there awareness? Is there not awareness? How do you go about trying to engage with industry other than, and maybe not just industry, it could be other government agencies throughout Europe that could use space as another tool in their toolbox?
Yeah, so first of all, we encounter the same phenomena. There is not that much awareness, but it is growing. I mean, when we compare it to, what was the dynamics a couple of years ago? I mean, it was a very elite type of utilization, and suddenly there are actually people coming to us without us having to go to them. And if we do a cold call, people are more open than they used to be. Still, the big challenge is that, we are, at least when I'm talking for my company, most of our guys are coming from the space industry.
Right.
And we are poking into different areas, and they are usually at the edge of cutting research or really new, very exciting evolutions, which have got nothing to do with our industry. And the challenge is to connect these and to find the right pollination point. And this is very, very difficult. So what you guys have got here in the US, where a dedicated organization is reaching out and making this communication and this awareness is indeed very, very helpful. And for me, this is one of the key success factors of this dynamics taking place. Very good, very good.
Any other comments on the awareness campaign, sort of just getting the message out? It's something at CASIS National Lab, it's something that we constantly struggle with as well. I think if we're about 50 strong, I think if we had 500 people, it would still be a big challenge. But there is some real value there, particularly with the ISS and the construct of a national lab that industry can take advantage of. We've taken the approach of taking on problem solving. So don't start with hardware solutions, don't start with getting too down in the weeds, but try to understand some of the more broad problems that industry has and maybe different companies have, and trying to align the natural environment of space and microgravity along with the capabilities of the national lab to maybe a few discrete problems that each one of the companies have. So that's how we approach it.
There's a lot of talk about, people oftentimes refer to it as the entrepreneurial space industry,
Right.
this new space. And I think when you talk about marketing and things like that, as startup companies, entrepreneurial startup companies have to look at value proposition and value development, but they also have to look at revenue.
Right.
And so, as long as it's appropriate, there's some things that certainly aren't appropriate.
Sure.
But we look at, I'm sure all of us, some of these things are other revenue streams that can help us do the serious work. And so it is, it's important for us to be able to do this in an appropriate way. And I think we've had great success so far with CASIS and NASA and being able to do that. So I do think there's it's not just doing it because, this is, it's kind of fun. It's a revenue stream. And when you're
Right.
building a new company, revenue's king. So
Right.
it's important.
Right, right. I want to get into one more topic area before we attempt to take some questions. It is challenging, this is hard, but it's also fun and exciting. There's a lot of opportunities. And we're seeing some good signs. We're seeing some positive signs from my perspective, from National Lab perspective, a couple of, I would say, positive indicators that we've seen is on the commercial services side, in-orbit commercial services side, we've seen some relatively rapid expansion of both companies and capabilities. I think to your point, advancing what we can do on the ISS to something that is more in line with what folks are doing on the ground is key. And sort of leading that renaissance of the National Laboratory and the ISS is coming from the commercial side. I think that's a great trend, and we seem to be seeing indicators that's going to continue to advance and develop and grow. Another key indicator is we're seeing more total project costs being carried by the project sponsor. So not too long ago, someone coming in to do microgravity technology development or work in space, it was some kind of a grant that covered most all of that work. It paid for the people working on the project, it bought the materials, it obviously paid for most of the flight hardware and payload development, mission integration and operations, the whole shooting match. We're at a point now, particularly with industry, where a very large percentage of that total project cost is being carried by that company or by that organization. We're still having some trouble in covering the full cost. I think payload development engineering in the flight environment is still a mystery and makes people very, very wary of making investments. So that's where, from a national lab perspective, and I think NASA helps out a lot to close that little bit of a gap that's left. I would like to ask from you guys who are in the business, and Mike, maybe we'll wind up with you before we go to questions. What are maybe some positive trends and indicators that you're seeing in your business or your industries? And maybe what are some not so positive trends that you're fighting against, that you're putting together some strategy or tactics to mitigate, to fight against those things? Let's start with you, Akash.
Yeah. So positive trends. So first of all, I've mentioned that we have started this experiment called Bartolomeo to see where the market is.
It's a balcony. I love that expression.
Balcony,
I've never heard it called a balcony.
And the positive trend is that we are signing customers. So that's a clear indication that there is an interest. Now, in terms of what is still hindering us, and I don't know if we have mentioned it specifically, but up and download cost. I mean, this is clearly, even though I agree with you that more and more the projects are able to carry a large portion of their cost, the up and download costs are still prohibitive. Right. And here we do see there is also an evolution. These prices are coming down, at least the market prices are coming down. But I do believe that probably even in the midterm, there will need to be some kind of an involvement, a continued involvement to make sure that these type of costs are not killing the market.
Right. Excellent. Good points. Anyone else? Chris?
No, I agree. I think I think one of the things for us is customer demand. I mean, when we first started thinking about this a number of years ago with everybody else, I mean, there wasn't anybody calling, and now we have lots of people calling, that are interested that you wouldn't think would necessarily be interested. A lot of these are transitioning into actual projects. And to your point, I agree. I mean, we have more. I mean, we've got a big project now with the National Stem Cell Foundation and Michael J. Fox and National MS Society, and they're paying the whole bill. I mean, it's
awesome.
It's a $250,000 first step, and so that, to your point, I mean, that's real evidence. If somebody's willing to actually pay for something of that nature, I think that's a testament to everybody here and NASA in cases that there's people are understanding what we're doing, and they want to be a part of it.
That's great. That's great news.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. To play off of that, the more kind of uncommon partners, the more kind of non-traditional aerospace users that we have that show up and say, I want to do something in space or do something in space, is a huge positive indicator. And even if it is just money coming from the marketing department of those companies,
right?
That's a wedge that drives you through to the rest of the organization. Right. I mean, we've experienced that with the folks that we've been able to bring to station.
Sometimes it's a very large wedge.
Yeah,
that's
sometimes
right.
it's a very large wedge.
That's right.
I think that's so the more of those folks we see, and frankly, the more implementation partners or kind of commercial folks operating on station or coming up and saying, I'm going to do this, is also a huge positive trend from our perspective. And even, and even more people saying, hey, I'm going to build a commercial space station. That's a really great trend. In terms of things that still put shackles on us, I think the date for ISS being direct federal funding stopping for ISS is a line in the sand, and it's a big challenge. It's a big opportunity. But I think we can hit that if we're pushing really hard and adding fuel to the flame of demand. Seeing more equipment being built that can live on ISS, and then getting some of these fine folks a port and moving it over to there. That's really having that capability-driven transition and really supporting this kind of scalable demand. We'll knock those. We'll take those shackles off and really let us run.
Christian, positive, what keeps you up at night? Either
Keeps
one?
me up at night. Well, on the positive side, qualitatively, we've seen, at least across the investor community, the question change from why space to how space. And so that's an important transition, because it's no longer a question of why do we need to be there, it's how can we do something effective there. So I think a key indicator in the future is just going to be simply investment dollars in these businesses that are seeking to make a profit in space. And so we're gonna need to track that. I also would suggest that, as this nascent in-space manufacturing capability comes online, I think that's going to be a key indicator of the health of the overall market as well, because the more profit and revenue we see generated from these things, obviously, the more need there is for LEO. What keeps me up at night, it comes back to what we said about the gap in coverage and the uncertainty. We really need to stop talking about a specific date in terms of ending ISS and talk about the right criteria to depart from ISS. And that really needs to be centered around a sustainable platform that's ready to go and take on the needs of both government and commercial. And if we can change the conversation from a date and instead set up some criteria and some checkpoints along the way that we look for and then ultimately set a date from, I think we're going to be in a much better shape. And I think from an investment community, the investors were going to appreciate a lot more that situation, because companies like Made in Space or companies like Space Tango will have a story that says, I have a continuous plan. I can get from here to there. And then for companies like us, we can count on the customers coming through. And that generates investment for us as well to go build a platform.
Mike, thoughts?
Yeah, I might offer just a little bit of background on how we got to where we're at with the National Lab. It even goes back to predating when CASES was stood up. We had some companies approach us, wanted to take some of their own hardware to ISS, and we thought, well, that's good. Let's do that. In many cases, it filled need gaps in our capabilities, but more importantly, it created another stakeholder layer that was out marketing and out trying to bring in new customers. We've talked about how difficult it is to convince a non-traditional market to use something as odd as space is to them. And so for about the last 6 or 7 years, we've probably brought in 10 at least companies that have their own hardware, that operate it on station, and are marketing it. The common theme, though, is that they're not all full, not all of them, but most of them aren't full with just people standing in queue waiting to use. And so we kind of started seeing that it's a small community, right? And it's a limited demand market right now. And there was some poaching of customers, or seeming poaching of customers. There was, everybody's looking for help with the demand. Ken, I know you guys see it from all the business development you do and the support you give to the commercial providers of the hardware. And so we kind of stepped back probably this last year and said, what's worked? Have we not tried? What should we try? And we kind of started putting two and two together, and we came up with, oh my gosh, we've got to develop the demand side. Yeah. And so it helps. It's the rising tide, the proverbial rising tide. Right. It helps all of the people that own and operate their own hardware. It helps the people that want to prove out technology demonstration for next-gen systems, for manufacturing, for all of that. It also helps those that want to build the next platform. So so we've got to pivot. We have not been doing enough. We've probably invested 80 or 90% of the funds that we've done over the last 8 or 9 years in the supply side. So, okay, that's all right. We've got a lot of good facilities up there that we did not have before. And you pair that with all the government facilities, and now you've got some interesting capabilities. But absent the kinds of things that can scale the demand, and you ask what are the indicators of when you know that you're at least approaching success? It's just when these guys come to us and say, we don't need 2 lockers, we need 2 racks.
That's right.
Of volume, because they're ready to scale. And good and bad, ISS wasn't set up to do that. It was a very broad stretch of capabilities, but not real deep in the way of throughput. And I think that was intentional because we were a multi-purpose lab. So when you get to the point where you're ready to scale, you're going to need the next gen modules or platforms because they're going to have the volume for you to acquire. And so it's probably a good thing that you can't scale on ISS because we cheat, we're subsidized, right? And we shouldn't, once a company gets to a certain point, Planet is a perfect example. They did 2 or 3 generations of CubeSats deployed through the subsidized platform of ISS using NanoRacks deployers, and then they moved on to a commercially available launch vehicle to get into the orbit that they wanted, and they started deploying their constellations. That's about as good as an example of a successful transition using the subsidy of ISS to a commercial capability as we can probably come up with.
Good. All right. I think we have just a few minutes. Why don't we see if we have any questions from either out online or in the audience?
Okay, Ken, I have a few questions back here. So the first question is, how can a Fortune 100 or 500 company that doesn't have a direct connection to space, for example, CocaCola, get involved with driving demand for the ISS?
How can Coca-Cola drive demand for the ISS? They can hire Andrew to print out some Coca-Cola cans in space. They can, we can go right on down the line. What do you think? How do Fortune 100 and 500s help us with this?
I think they look for their own corporate interest. Every one of these large companies has a philanthropic arm. And they also have corporate interests that Coca-Cola uses water, a lot of water. Maybe they've got an interest in water conservation, water preservation, purification. There's all kinds of things you can do on ISS in that regard. And they go to CASIS and they say, I want to do a sponsored program. And much like Target did with their Cotton Challenge, there's all kinds of ways to get involved. It can fuel their own corporate interests, not from just a science perspective, but from a humanitarian perspective.
Yeah, if that was Coca-Cola answering the question, they can email me and I'll give them some good suggestions on a Coca-Cola water sustainability sponsored program.
I would say, Ken, that another way that really synergizes is when we as a space-focused entity have common alignment with a strategic goal of a company like that. Like, for example, with Coca-Cola, they have a huge interest in recycling these things.
Sure.
And it's a complex problem because it's a multi-material thing, and it's got like food and and sugar and all this stuff in it. But they want to take this and they want to turn it back into a clean bottle and then fill it again with some sugar water and sell it to us again. Yep. From a space perspective, I really want to make a rugged system that can recycle a wide variety of materials on a deep space mission so that I can provide tools to astronauts on the way to Mars. And that's addressing we're coming at the same problem from like sort of from different directions.
Right.
So so a potential way that works out is that we end up hooking up with Coke and saying, look, we've gone this far with some work with NASA or somebody else or internally, and you want this, so you put some money in, and we'll put some money in, and we'll develop the system, and you can go make $1 billion a year, recycling Coke bottles, and I'll go do cool space stuff, and it works out pretty well.
Right.
Yeah, I would also add one quick thing. I know we're out of time, but I would encourage any of you to just, because I think they've done a great job, is you can go to YouTube, and if you go to YouTube and Beer on Mars or something, Anheuser-Busch developed about 60-second ad, 70-second ad about the work we're doing with them cases, and it's really quite good. They spend a lot of money on it. It's very inspirational, and I think it's an example of a company that you would not think that says, we want to be here, we need to be here, because this is what we're about. We're about innovation, we're about pushing the envelope. Why wouldn't we be here?
That's right.
And I would encourage you to look, because they really did a nice job of I think, operationalize what we're talking about right here. Well, how can these big companies play an important role?
Right. Are we out of time? Okay, I think we're out of time. That was a great discussion. Thank you very much to all the panelists. We really appreciate it, and thank you for the audience's attention. Hopefully we all learned a little bit, and we continue this discussion moving forward. And let's give our panelists a hand. Thank you.